Dr. Cameisha Denise Clark had always been the kind of person who carried light with her. Born and raised in Atlanta, she was known in her family for her big laugh, her determination, and her love of learning. From a young age, she wanted to prove not only to herself, but to the world that she could climb every rung of the academic ladder. At Clark Atlanta University, she did exactly that, becoming what fellow alumni call a triple Panther, someone who earns a bachelor's, master's, and doctorate, all from the same beloved institution. She was deeply tied to the HBCU community, mentoring others, giving advice, and lifting people who often doubted themselves. Family members later described her as the kind of person who made everyone feel seen. She believed in empathy and in pushing people toward their highest potential. That quality carried her into the role of Dean of Student Affairs at Spartan College of Aeronautics and Technology in Inglewood, California. At only 35 years old, she had carved out a career that was both impressive and inspiring. Friends say she would text her grandmother to share her excitement about the role, reminding her family that she had finally stepped into the world she had dreamed of since graduate school. She would say things like, "I'm in my world now. I'm a dean." The words were full of pride, but also full of gratitude. She wanted her family to feel the joy she felt. Spartan College was not a huge university. It was a smaller technical institution focused on aviation, engineering, and hands-on careers. The role of Dean of Student Affairs in a place like that is vital. It meant that Cameisha was at the center of the student experience, managing services, supporting faculty, guiding discipline, and offering a listening ear. For young people trying to become pilots, mechanics, or engineers, she was the anchor who could connect them to resources. But on May 2nd, 2025, all of that was shattered. It was a Friday afternoon. Students and staff were preparing to wrap up their week. The spring sun fell across Aviation Boulevard, painting the buildings in Inglewood with its usual warmth. Inside her office, Cameisha and her assistant were working through routine duties. There was nothing to suggest that danger was about to walk through the door. Around 3:45, the quiet of the office was broken by the arrival of a man in a security uniform. His name was Jesse Figueroa. He was 40 years old, and until recently, he had worked as a security guard at Spartan College. To anyone glancing up, the uniform would have suggested authority and safety. But what happened next revealed the opposite. Figueroa opened fire. Bullets tore through the small office. Cameisha was struck. Her assistant was struck. In an instant, the normal rhythm of an academic workplace collapsed into chaos. Staff scrambled. Students nearby were told to lock themselves inside classrooms. Police were called. Paramedics rushed to the scene. For a brief window of time, it was unclear if Cameisha would survive. She was rushed to the hospital with critical injuries. Her assistant also was treated, but managed to survive. The gunman fled, disappearing into Los Angeles traffic. Police later confirmed that Figueroa was located a few hours later in Koreatown and arrested without further incident. In the hospital, the battle for Cameisha's life continued into the weekend. Her family in Atlanta received the phone call no one wants. They rushed to organize flights, prayers, and vigils. Messages flooded social media from former students, friends, and colleagues, all pleading for her recovery. But by Monday, the news came. Dr. Cameisha Denise Clark had died of her wounds. At 35, in the prime of her career, her life was cut short inside the very office she was meant to guide others toward their futures. The news sent shockwaves through both California and Georgia. Clark Atlanta University issued statements mourning her loss. They had just celebrated her success days earlier, posting about her achievements and her journey as a triple Panther. Now that celebration turned into grief. Faculty and students at Spartan College were stunned. The woman they saw walking the halls, greeting students, and building programs was gone. Vigils were held in both Atlanta and Los Angeles. At one Atlanta service, family and friends described her as compassionate, intelligent, and deeply rooted in her family values. Her grandmother, who had received those proud texts, now held on to them as precious memories. As the community mourned, questions turned to the man accused of ending her life. Who was Jesse Figueroa? Why was he allowed on campus? And how did he get close enough to carry out such an attack? Records revealed disturbing facts. Figueroa was not an active security guard at the time of the shooting. His license had expired more than a decade earlier. In fact, he had a prior criminal record, including robbery convictions from 2007. Yet somehow he had been employed in a security role. And on that day, he walked freely onto campus in uniform. The uniform gave him access. The uniform gave him cover. And in the end, the uniform became a camouflage for violence. The revelation sparked outrage. How could someone with a serious criminal past, without a violent license, find work as a guard in a school filled with students? How could background checks fail so catastrophically? Families across Inglewood asked the same questions. For Dr. Clark's relatives, the outrage turned into action. Within months, her family filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Spartan College, its security contractors, and other parties they believed were negligent. The lawsuit argued that the college failed in its duty to protect its staff by hiring or contracting with someone unqualified, dangerous, and unstable. They pointed out that this was not a random attack from a stranger off the street. This was workplace violence carried out by a man who should never have been in a position of trust. For her students and colleagues, the shock settled into trauma. Her assistant, who survived, now faced recovery from not only physical wounds, but the emotional scars of surviving an ambush at work. Other staff members struggled to walk past the office where their dean had been shot. Counseling services were offered. Flowers were placed near her door. The space that once carried laughter and mentorship now carried silence. Meanwhile, her assistant, who had been in the office with her that day, carried both the trauma of survival and the responsibility of testimony. She had seen what no one else should see, lived through what no one else should endure. While her injuries healed physically, the emotional scars would last far longer. Every time she walked past a security guard or heard the sound of the office door opening, her body remembered that afternoon. Survivors of violence carry the echoes with them, and she was no exception. Cameisha's family turned their grief into advocacy. They spoke at press conferences. They stood before cameras in both Atlanta and Los Angeles, demanding accountability. They announced a wrongful death lawsuit in August of 2025, suing Spartan College and its security contractors for negligence. They emphasized that this was not about money, but justice. They wanted policies changed so that no other family would suffer the way they had. They wanted to shine light on the broken system that allowed a 6-time felon to stand guard over students. The lawsuit detailed a damning chain of failures: expired licenses ignored, background checks skipped, contractors who valued cost over safety. It argued that Spartan College had failed in its duty of care, and that failures directly led to Cameisha's death. In legal filings, the family demanded not just damages but reforms. They wanted new standards for security hiring. They wanted oversight tightened. They wanted transparency. The case also ignited broader debates about workplace violence in America. Experts pointed out that while mass shootings often make headlines, smaller incidents of targeted workplace attacks are far more common. Thousands of Americans are injured or killed every year by coworkers, former employees, or contractors who slip past oversight. The spaces we think of as safe, schools, offices, hospitals, are often vulnerable because institutions assume a uniforms equal safety. But uniforms, as Cameisha's case shows, can lie. In the months after her death, Clark Atlanta University announced a scholarship in her name. The scholarship was designed to support students pursuing leadership roles, particularly women of color. At the announcement, speakers described her as someone who always saw the potential in others. They said the scholarship would ensure that her legacy lived on in future generations. Students who never met her would carry her name into their careers. That was the kind of immortality her family wanted for her. Not headlines, but hope. Her story also became a rallying point for Black women in academia. Across social media, scholars and educators spoke about the dangers they face, not just from overt violence, but from systems that failed to protect them. They pointed out that Black women often carried the weight of mentoring, advising, and supporting students, yet institutions too often failed to invest in their safety. Cameisha's death became a symbol of that imbalance. She had given so much to her students and her institution, and yet her institution had not protected her in return. Jesse Figueroa has been charged and is awaiting trial. Prosecutors have filed charges of murder, attempted murder, and weapon enhancements. If convicted, he faces life in prison. For Dr. Clark's family, accountability will take time, but the process has only just begun. For her family and friends, justice will never be complete. No verdict can bring her back. No sentence can replace the daughter, the sister, the cousin, the dean. But accountability matters. It matters to her mother, to her grandmother, to the students who saw her as a role model. It matters to every parent who wants to believe their child will be safe on a college campus. It matters to every educator who goes back to work each day believing their job is about shaping lives, not risking their own. Only a few months have passed since the day violence entered her office. The grief is still raw. Students still leave flowers by her door. Notes of remembrance still cover the wall outside of her office space. Some write about how she convinced them not to give up on school. Others recall the confidence she gave them when no one else believed in them. One note simply reads, "You saw me when I felt invisible. Thank you, Dean Clark." Her family continues to grieve while pressing forward with their wrongful death lawsuit, arguing that Spartan College and its contractors failed to protect her. The scholarship in her name has already begun collecting donations, ensuring her impact stretches into the future. Candlelight vigils still take place, not as distant commemorations, but as present-day demands for accountability and change. This story is not in the past, it's still unfolding. The trial of the man accused is pending. The lawsuit has only just been filed. Her loved ones are still navigating first season of life without her. For her community in Atlanta and in Los Angeles, the wound is fresh, and the call for justice is loud. Dr. Cameisha Denise Clark should have lived decades more, mentoring generations of students. Instead, her story stands as a warning about what happens when systems fail. But even in loss, her legacy is undeniable. It is alive in every student she guided, every scholarship awarded in her name, and every demand her family makes for safer institutions. This is Midnight Verdict. Straight facts, no fluff. Remember her name, Dr. Cameisha Denise Clark, a scholar, a mentor, a dean, and a light extinguished too soon.